with the franchising company, and we're excited to bring you our third episode of our Franchise 40 ZorZooms series.
And in this series, we're interviewing some of our favorite franchisors and asking them the important questions. Questions you can't just Google to find, questions that you really want to know.
So today's interview is with Brian of Joe Homebuyer. So good morning, Brian. Thank you so much for participating in our Franchise 40 ZorZooms series. If you don't mind, just to get us started, tell us a little bit about yourself and then just an overview of Joe Homebuyer.
Yeah, first off, thanks for inviting me to this. This is exciting. So my name is Brian Kuepper. I am the Vice President of Franchise Development for Joe Homebuyer. I've been in franchising about 10 years now. I've been on the franchisor side. I've been on the consultant side as well as the franchisee side. So I have a little bit of experience in all aspects of it. So Joe Homebuyer. Joe Homebuyer is a franchise that specializes in finding properties off market at a significant discount. Now, what does that mean? All off market means is someone who needs or wants to sell their property fast and faster than they could on the market with a realtor. So think of somebody who inherits a house, a couple going through a divorce, someone behind on their mortgage, that sort of thing. Once the property is found, our owners can keep it as a rental. They can fix it up and flip it, or they can just find another investor to buy it.
Can you go into a little more detail about how you find the properties, how you help your owners find the properties?
Yeah, love to. We are, at the end of the day, we're a sales and marketing company. That's our specialty. And so our marketing is what finds the properties. So most of the properties are essentially inbound. It's a variety of marketing strategies from Google AdWords, pay-per-click of some kind to direct mail. They can hire a company to do cold calling. There's a variety of marketing strategies. Every area is a little bit different in this world. And so one of the first things we do with our franchisees is we build out a custom marketing plan for their territory, for where they are.
Okay. And does that marketing plan, you had mentioned that you could flip the deed or wholesale the deed. How do they find these kinds of buyers that are looking for the wholesale flips?
Yeah. So if you think of the marketing as one side of the coin that finds the property, the other side is the buyer, right? If you find a great property and you don't have a buyer, it doesn't matter, and the vice versa doesn't matter. So we put a big emphasis on building a very large local buyers list for each franchisee. And so we have a step-by-step process on how to build it. When I say large, I'm not talking a few hundred, I'm talking, tens of thousands. Franchisees with 20, 30,000 people on a local buyers list, all investors that invest in that local area. So it's a big part of the process. Just like marketing is done day in and day out, building that buyers list is the same thing. They'll be building and adding to that buyers list every day.
And you don't need a real estate license, correct?
Correct. In Oklahoma and Illinois are the only two states in the country that require a real estate license. Every other country, you do not.
Okay. Do you have a percentage breakdown of, how many homes get flipped or wholesale or, kept as rentals?
From our franchisees?
Yes.
So the majority of what they do is wholesale, which for anyone listening, it's the action of just matching a buyer and a homeowner. And they receive essentially a finder's fee. Every franchisee has a different focus on what they want. So for example, we have a franchisee in Texas. He's doing close to 15 flips right now. He buys all the properties himself, and he just he's either going to flip them or he's just going to build a large rental portfolio. And that's his focus. For others, they want to build a large 7-figure plus business. So the majority of what they're doing is going to be wholesaling to start and then get into some flipping. They'll sort of cherry pick the properties they want to buy. So they'll do a few properties a year versus, 20 properties a year. I would say across the board on average, they're going to wholesale anywhere from 80 to 100%, and then focus on the others. The main reason is if you don't need any capital from a business standpoint, if you don't need revenue, then you can buy properties all day long and just think of yourself as the investor. Most people are not in that situation where they want to have a business as well. And if you flip a property, it might be a huge return on that investment, but it might take 3, 6, 9, 12 months, depending on what the rehab is. So it's a long process, where the wholesaling, you could be out of that property in a week or two. And so the wholesaling piece is really that monthly revenue of the business that keeps the business building.
Yeah. Makes sense. Use that to cash flow your flips and or your purchases for rentals. Yeah. So what would you say in terms of who are you looking for as a franchise owner? I mean, these folks need to have real estate experience? Do they need to have a sales background? I mean, ideally for you guys, what's the perfect type of franchise candidate?
Yeah, first it's a passion for real estate. We're all a little bit brainwashed over here. We think real estate's one of, if not the best ways of growing true generational wealth. And so all our franchisees believe that as well. After that, we want people that are hungry and action takers, number one. So you mentioned sales. We are a sales and marketing company. So somebody who has, say, a B2C sales experience is a perfect fit for us. That is the type of sales that we're in. They're not walking around, knocking on doors, selling solar. But if you think of that type of mentality, that type of person, they're a perfect fit for us. Now, we have top producers that are across the board, top producers that have zero sales experience, those that come from military, really across the board. But they all have that same mentality of, I'm going to take imperfect action and I'm going to get the job done. And as long as they come with that mentality, then they're a very good fit for us. They don't necessarily need the sales experience. We can.
Okay. So what sets you apart from your competition? Why would somebody why would one of our clients choose Joe Homebuyer over the other real estate options out there?
Yeah, I would say number one is our culture. So we have about 90 franchisees right now, about 80 franchisees, about 90 territories. Our founders, Mark and Cody, are still very involved in the business, and they've built a culture that is around, it's very collaborative, it's very partner feel. So if your clients like the idea of really building a solid business with partners, we're a very good fit for them. I would say culture is by far number one.
Okay.
So we had watched a couple of video interviews from some of your successful franchise owners, and they had talked about predictive index.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about what that is, what it means, and how you guys leverage that tool to build a successful business?
Yeah, absolutely. We're big fans of predictive index. Predictive index is a very short assessment, behavioral assessment. When I say short, it's 2 questions. It'll take you maybe 5 minutes. And it gives us, we use it in a couple of ways. One, it gives us a very good idea of what the best role for you might be, whether sales is going to be your focus, or you're going to be more operational, or you're going to be great at, building a team and structuring that. So it helps our owners really scale. Who's the right first hire for them as they're growing their business? In the beginning, as business owners, you're doing a little bit of everything, but as you're growing and scaling, it helps us assess that. Our franchisees also use it. So they use it. All of our franchisees have taken it. Just about all of their employees over the years have taken it as well. So we know what profiles are ideal for different roles within their organization. So as they're hiring people, one of the first things they'll do is they'll have them take the predictive index based on the role. If it's not, take the sales role as an example. there's 3 or 4 profiles that have been proven to be successful. Acquisition managers is the name of the salesperson. Proven to be successful acquisition managers. If it's not one of those 4, we advise to not even interview them, just move on. So it's cut down on the churn of our franchise owners, employees, as well as cut down on the time it takes to interview and assess new employees.
And how many employees on average do your franchise owners have?
So in the beginning, they usually start with a virtual assistant. And then they start typically with a salesperson is usually their first hire to pull them out of that role. Even if they're really good at it, pull them out of that role so that they can focus on building a business. The owner, one or 2 salespeople and a virtual assistant, you can grow a pretty sizable business just doing that. We have some owners that have stayed in that world. If they want to grow beyond that, if they want to go, be a 7-figure top 1% of the franchise, they'll need a few salespeople and maybe a lead manager. So maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 employees long term.
Okay. So tell us a little about the financial commitment, how the buyers can buy the real estate without using their own money.
Yeah.
Tell us how that works.
Yeah. So our overall, our financial investment is 130 to 150,000. Most of that is in marketing. We don't have brick and mortar. There's no equipment. There's no product. It really is a marketing company and marketing spend. So most of it is going to go into that. We advise all of our franchise owners who are looking to buy properties to not use their money, even if they can afford it. We have some partnerships with some national short-term lenders, which will allow our franchisees to borrow money at a short term with better terms than they could if they were just off the street with the partnership that we have, that Joe Homebuyer has with them. And so leveraging that will allow them to, and other lenders will allow them to buy these properties cash without using their money. We help them assess the numbers to make sure that even if they're paying a little bit of interest on that short-term loan, that the numbers work out. We're getting the properties at such a discount that a little extra interest doesn't really impact that. And then once they have that property, then they refinance it into a traditional mortgage.
So when you say getting a significant discount, what's the average? I assume it's not at the appraised rate. What are you seeing?
Yeah, this could be anywhere from 40 to 60 cents on the dollar. So significant discount on it. Yeah.
Wow. And then going back to the short-term rates and things like that, what does a short-term loan term, like what do they typically look like? Are we talking 30, 60, 90 days? And
depends on what they need it for. Yeah, but if they're just buying it themselves, then usually 30, 60, 90 days. If they're flipping it, then it will depend on how long that rehab is. So it just depends on the situation. It's something they can sort of do whatever is needed based on the project.
so we work with a lot of clients, and we always have those that are looking for more of a passive investment. So is Joe Homebuyer structured where somebody could come in as a passive or semi-active owner day one, and if not, is it something that they could work toward in the future?
It's not something that they can do from day one. It is a full-time owner operator. Now we have partners as owners where one is more of the semi-absentee, kind of chimes in once or twice a month, but they have a partner that's full-time. They can pull back if their goal is to pull back on their hours. Then it's certainly something that we can help them structure and build. We have that within our system of owners who, they're okay with a slightly less lower margin because they're hiring, say, a general manager or someone on operations to really manage the day-to-day. That could be Realistically, I would say expect to be full-time for at least the first year. And then the biggest question from there is how big of a business do you want? We have owners that, are doing, I can't talk about numbers as but have a healthy business and they're happy with it. They're not at our, top 10%, but with the work-life balance that they have, they're fine with it. They don't want to add more people and, double their revenue, even though they could. And so it just depends on how much, what business do they want ultimately?
Kind of what their goals are, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about the territories, how you divide in exclusive versus non-exclusive? How does that all?
Yeah, so our territories are very large. They are not exclusive. What we found is it's better for our franchisees in this particular world to have a larger territory with multiple franchisees than to have a smaller territory that's exclusive to them. Just the way the market is, the way the demographics of areas change. I mean, if you think of how the country has changed, since 2020, people moving around into different areas and going remote, demographics of territories have changed. And so having a really large territory allows our owners to adapt regardless of what's happening in the economy or what's changing in their particular area. It also allows them to work together and collaborate. Our franchisees are extremely collaborative, and they'll come together and do marketing strategies together. I'll give you an example. In Utah, we have 4 franchisees in the state of Utah. We've closed down the state, so we could easily handle more franchisees. But our model is to have fewer franchisees that are all doing exceptionally well than to pack and have 1,000 franchisees in the country. We will never get to 1,000. We don't have any plans to get to 1,000. A few hundred that are very highly successful would make us very happy.
Okay.
So you had talked about your culture earlier, right? And how the founders really created this. And then you just touched on, your franchisees being collaborative. So can you give us some examples on how, what they do in terms of collaborating, how they help one another, share ideas, to your point, maybe pull together marketing dollars, but can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I'll use the Utah example. So 4 franchisees, so they've come together and they've tested radio ads, television ads, billboards in the greater counties. And we have a structure to help them facilitate that round robin leads. So it's all very, very structured and clear. But they've come together individually in order to test those different marketing channels. That might be, pretty expensive for one owner to do on their own. But when they pull their marketing dollars together, it's really not a bad test. And so that's an example. Another example would be sharing resources. So let's say you and I are in the same territory and my salesperson moves out of the state and you have a salesperson that has some bandwidth. I can leverage your salesperson potentially while I hire somebody else or vice versa. Let's say I'm just getting started and you've been in the area and you have a large buyers list and I'm still working on building my buyers list. Well, I can leverage your buyers list in order to help move a property. And so that's, those are some examples of just our owners being very collaborative. Is that it's not written in our contract that you have to share anything with me or that I have to share anything with you. But as we take candidates through the process, it's one of the things we evaluate. Are they going to be a good cultural fit? We're definitely of the mindset of the abundance mindset. And all of our owners have that mindset. If somebody doesn't have the abundance mindset, if they are, no, this is mine, I can't share it, or, I'm going to be competing with a franchisee in my area, it won't work because it's not reality. There's a lot of opportunity.
Definitely team oriented. It's like you're a big team, not competing against each other.
Exactly.
That. One of the questions or feedback or critical comments I get a lot whenever I talk to our clients about Joe Homebuyer is the market. You know, the market's could crash. The market's going to crash. It's not a good time. That's not actually an issue, right? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, we're very, usually when people think of that, they're thinking of the on-market retail side of things, where they know a realtor that's struggling. We're not in that world. We're dealing with investors as buyers. Our buyers are either professional flippers, and this is what they do. Professional flippers don't buy properties through a realtor because the margins are too tight. So they're using wholesalers and people off market. Or we're working with people that are buying and building large rental portfolios. Again, they're typically not, if you're buying 1 or 2 rentals, yeah, you might go with a realtor. If you're buying 100, you're not using a realtor because you'll waste tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that. And so we're working in the off-market world that isn't, it's affected by the economy, but not in a way where it crashes us. It just makes us pivot a little bit. If you think of who we're working with people that need or want to be out of their house yesterday. That doesn't change, right? There's people in any economy that are pre-foreclosure. There's people inheriting houses every day and they're selling the whole estate, and there happens to be a few rental properties that are part of that estate. Couples unfortunately get divorced every month, and could they list it and in some markets wait 3, 6, 9 months to sell it at top dollar and then split it then? Yeah, they could. Do they often want to rip the Band-Aid off and sell it tomorrow and just move on? Yeah, they do. So because of the situations we're working with, they happen in every area and in every economic situation. So it doesn't really affect us that much.
It almost seems like it's a bigger opportunity. There's more options whenever people need to get out of their homes due to financial reasons.
That's right. Yep, that's right. And there's always buyers out there. If there's a good deal, the buyers are there.
Gotcha. Well, I know we've hit a lot. And so is there anything else that any potential franchisee that you want, what should they know? How do we get them interested to have a conversation with you?
Yeah, I'd say if they're interested in real estate, if they have a passion for real estate, they don't need any experience in it, but if they're interested in real estate, building a large business, and they're ready to, we call it fail forward, take imperfect action with our guidance, of course, then we'd love to talk to them.
I like that. Fail forward.
Fail forward, yeah.
Writing that down.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we coach on. I'll talk just real quick. We have a 30-day onboarding that is all about getting your business off the ground and profitable as fast as humanly possible. So instead of a traditional, we're going to coach you for 30 days and role play and go through PowerPoints and do all of that so that your business can start in 30 days. We're going to start you day 1. So our goal is to run you through the entire business model, have you on the phone with potential homeowners, have you on the phone with investors immediately so that you can start learning. So when, it's really about, again, failing forward and imperfect action. So what we found is we can ramp up somebody significantly faster by just getting them started and teaching them along the way versus coaching them and teaching them and then having them get started. So that's really scary to a lot of people. So if that scares someone, probably not the best fit for Joe Homebuyer. But if you, regardless of the background, if somebody hears that and says, yeah, let's go, I'm jumping in, then that's the mentality that we want.
No, I love that. You learn by doing, not by watching.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing all this information on Joe Homebuyer. I know our clients and others that will see this will find it very useful and exciting. So thanks for participating in the Franchise 40 ZorZooms, and we look forward to working with you with some of our clients here soon.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is great. You guys are some of the best in the industry, so look forward to working with your candidates.
Well,
Well, thank
thank you.